value, their market cap, whatever.
Right.
And in China, they're probably valued at around 20 or $25 billion. Has the auto dealer become irrelevant in US? Clearly no.
No.
Despite the fact that, they've had internet forever. Has it become irrelevant in China? The answer is no. Do you ever imagine, these companies, whatever leads they get on their websites or, other third-party channels like, Car Trade, Car Dekho, Gaadi, whatever. Do you ever imagine a day where, they will start selling on those leads directly? No. They'll always be passed on to the dealers. Why? Because we are selling a relatively complex product. And the difference would be that which of the dealers would survive and thrive and which of the dealers will not. And that is where the adoption of technology will make a difference. I mean, look at other industries. For instance, buying fashion online has become so common, right? I mean, you've got platforms like Myntra, Jabong, Flipkart Fashion, Amazon Fashion. But the best brands, they reserve their best inventory either for their franchisees or for their own branded stores or for their own website. And this is the trend, that's there even in the most developed markets. Yep. So, what we need to acknowledge is that, even when we read all these horror stories of, industries and intermediaries, going out of business, I mean, ours is an industry where, we are selling a complex product. And as long as, the product remains complex, as long as, they need a human face, to sell, we will remain relevant. The question is that, are we adopting, these tools and technologies, to do better than the guy next door or not, is where the bigger challenge will come to our industry, in my, humble opinion.
So I'm really thankful for your input.
We'll probably come back to that towards the last part also, but I think before we go there, let me just give you a picture on the second most discussed topic that is going around, I think, at this point of time, which is electric vehicles. And I think Jagan very briefly mentioned about that. So if you look at it, in terms of the entire value chain of electric vehicles, when you look at it from a customer perspective, there are many, many questions. What you see on the screen right now is the current adoption of basically BEVs, and which is a very, very small number, and it was forecasted to be about 2 million over the next 5 years. With the kind of changes that are being proposed in the current policy of the Indian government, when we are looking at 100% changeover, and many countries have announced that now, France has announced that, India has announced that by 2030 you are looking at a full shift into this. How do you see the journey evolving, Jagan, and I come to you on this. Yeah. How do you see the journey evolving? I mean, where do you see the adoptions coming in earlier? Which sectors will adopt a little later? Yeah. How do you see this journey between 2018 to 2030?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Whether it's going to be an electric vehicle, so I'm not a dooms guy for an IC in part of it, right? So electric vehicles will take its time to be coming in here. The point in a different way to look at it is, IC was the cornerstone. Something has come and said that I can dislodge you, okay? The way to look at it is that. Then if that can dislodge, probably there will be some other technology which will come in and dislodge it further too, right? It's the first break that you get into an established segment, and there will be others who will also come in with some other technology to do it, okay? So I'm just putting it in a broader horizon there. In terms of adoption part of it, clearly the public transport would be the first to adopt it for very clear reasons in terms of pollution perspective, in terms of multilaterals or the green funding that can come in.
Right.
So the buses part of it, I mean, we've seen Delhi, so they move to the CNG, will be a clear shift to move to the electric vehicles. They can clearly push that agenda through, that is the EV guys. And the volumes are also low, so they would be able to have, and the impact that it has to the wider people who are seeing it is far higher. So that will certainly be the first which will go through the whole curve part of it. The second, obviously, would be government trying to say, extending probably the public transport into the commercial vehicles part of it, and they say that try to go green. So that could be the second wave which will be there. In parallel, obviously, the consumers who would want to adopt it would do that. Obviously, as the adoption is happening on one side, you will have price drops which will happen probably on the IC side, right? So there would still be a market for that. What was not so was out of reach becomes in reach for some of the consumers, and they will start getting into that IC part of it. So that will still go on for at least about 8 to 10 years. And India is really a big country. So where it gets adopted and how it gets adopted could be the question mark, and in the sense that we want to go from urban to semi-urban to rural, that part of the adoption, and Indians are conservative in their way of looking at things. Would you have the spare parts? This is not a tested part of it. What happens to my hard-earned money? To anybody who is putting even today about 8 to 10 lakhs of money is significant for him as far as that money is concerned. So he would want to go on a tried and tested. So all of this for people to change, it's not like a Netflix, like an Amazon. It's like, okay, $3,000, it doesn't matter here or there. So to that extent, I completely agree. It will take time for people to get on to this part of it. And that adoption will happen over a period of time. And if there are going to be other technologies which will come into it, then yes, that will also further put in the complexity into that whole thing. So the adoption would be public transportation, then you'll have your commercial vehicles, then you will all have your
to the next, the personal car, the personal
cars,
vehicle.
yeah.
So, I mean, looking at a very interesting trend at this point of time, I don't know how many of you are aware, if you look at the entire millennial generation in the US, the people who are right now coming to 17 years old, there's a very interesting data point. If you look at about 15 years ago to what you look at now, number of 17-year-olds who are applying for a driver license has dropped by 50%. This is an actual number, 50% drop in terms of number of people who were applying for a driver license. So the expression of freedom, which used to be there at that, when 15 years ago, and for many of us standing out here, that look, I need to get my car and I need to be able to drive anywhere, that's kind of changing with all these shared mobility services which are coming in. And I think for that, Kashyap, I would probably bring it to you. Do you see that, from an investment perspective, from how the money is flowing in, is that something which is likely to accelerate? And how is that going to impact the overall car ownership? And how is that going to impact the adoption of EVs? That's something that we talked about just now.
I wouldn't have a very, very sophisticated view on, what the impact on EVs would be.
Okay.
Even though, the government is working very, very closely, with, at least Ola and Uber on making sure that, they're able to introduce electric vehicles, ahead of, the larger public use, as Jagan just mentioned.
Right.
But is money following them, and is there, in the investment community, is there a serious belief that, it'll affect car ownership going forward? The answer is a clear yes.
Yeah.
Will it affect car ownership to the extent that people will stop buying cars at all? Mm-hmm. The answer is, clearly no. But in urban areas, in areas, that are relatively heavily populated, right. Will it affect, people buying a second, third, or fourth car? Mm-hmm. The answer clearly is yes. But, in a country like India, increasingly, car ownership will also see a trickle-down effect, just as it's seen in China and Indonesia, right? So, these markets where, public transportation in form of, an Ola or Uber,
right.
Is not really, really feasible. I think those areas would continue to see, ever increasing demand.
Okay.
But, in heavy urban pockets like, let's say a Bombay or a Delhi, people in the investment fraternity do believe that, second, third, or fourth car ownership would come down, because of these platforms.
So coming to you, Jagan, I know that Crystal has done work in terms of understanding, at what point does it make sense to actually buy a car, how many kilometers if you're running, what kind of this thing. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so we did some analysis as on date. What we figured out is that if anybody does more than 20,000 kilometers in a year, then it makes sense for him to go and buy a 6 lakh to an 8 lakh kind of a car, okay? If that's not the case, then it just makes a lot more sense that he goes through the shared economy part of it. Now that what the various pluses for having a car is obviously going to be there. I'm not going to into a debate part of it. Just mathematically, if you were to look at it, what's the, in 5 years, 6 years, I start off with a 7, 8 lakh car, what's the scrap value, how the number of kilometers that I run, what's the insurance that I pay, the tire changing part of it, the battery changing part of it, and the complexity is further added on. If you put a driver in, then it just kills it. Saying that if you have a driver and you need to pay in today's context, at least in Mumbai, you would not get anything between less than 15,000 rupees, thanks to the same Ola and Uber who have pushed that whole driver part of it. That itself is 1,80,000 if you were to look at it in a year.
Yeah.
So any office goer in today's context would be doing probably about a 40-kilometer. Reasonable to assume that that's what it is that he would do, multiplied by whatever it is, 200 odd days plus your weekends that you would go.
Right.
It's quite significant number of, so breaking it down, we figured that if you do like 50, 60 kilometers a day is where it makes meaningful sense to go and buy a car.
So, yeah, sorry.
So sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think that's great. I mean, just to understand from the audience, before I come to you, Venkesh, on a very interesting point, how many of you own a car at this point of time? But just a show of hand.
Everybody.
No, I need to see that. Look, people are not raising their hands. Yeah,
Everybody owns
okay.
a car.
How many of you own an electric car? Sorry?
One.
You shouldn't. You are
One
a dealer
person.
for electric.
You're a
No,
dealer.
dealer should not.
Excellent. Okay. How many of you would be purchasing an electric car as your next car? Okay, the number goes up. 4 people, 5 people. Okay, 5 people in the audience. How many of you have used some kind of Olas or Ubers?
Everybody.
Fantastic. So I think that really communicates, the point that Jagan was trying to illustrate out here. In terms of the way the industry is moving, the way things are changing in the concept of the future of mobility, the future is upon us already, actually. And with that, I come to you.
Sorry, just one point on that.
Yeah.
Places like Mumbai, I mean, look at Singapore. I mean,
Right.
there's a congestion tax, right? I mean, it's just clearly moving ahead.
Yep.
So they will push, and the cost of a car ownership will increase very significantly in metro cities.
Right.
And that's more the regulatory part of it which will drive it.
Yep.
The parking part of it, the whole stress, the whole part of everything that you put across.
Absolutely.
It
I mean,
just
and I think
adds up to
Singapore,
that whole
yeah,
thing.
I completely agree. I mean, Singapore, I can talk about a few things about that place. If you look at it, the way things are changing in Singapore right now is you have a satellite-based road pricing system coming up. So right now it was gantry-based. So as you pass through a gantry, you pay money. It is shifting to a satellite-based where, there are, of course, security